without that, without the big fund. Okay, so this is what it's fundamentally about. And what I want to show you is how these structures are operating. It's just 20 minutes, so we can't do very much, but just to give you a little bit of an idea. And why I keep the ideology part there is because we are part of the producers of ideology. At universities and academic institutions, we are complicit in this whole enterprise. Okay, so the job of many Western academics is to convince Africans they have to keep doing what they're doing. Okay, and to show them it's your fault that you're poor. It's not our fault. It's your fault that you're poor.
NGOs.
This is what we do in academic institutions, and I want to show that as well. To start, this is what it's basically about, so you know what it's about. But I want to just show you the extent to which Africa is specializing in the production of raw materials and basic agricultural goods. We know the basic forces that have caused this underdevelopment. We know it's colonization. I will not discuss that very much because my colleague speaker is going to go into some aspects of this. But I do want to discuss the global economic structures, the global financial institutions, and economic ideology, briefly, to give you a flavor of those. Let me start with this. You can't really see it so easily, but if those of you who are interested, you want the PowerPoint, I'm sure we can make it available to you. But the thing that you really need to see is the top line. Okay? And the extent of dependency is statistic at the top. Okay? And you compare it all other income groups. And what you see is essentially that one statistic, how dependent sub-Saharan Africa is on raw material production. Okay, this is the very heart of what makes sub-Saharan Africa beat. Okay. Here, just to have a look at one very important additional statistic. With all this export coming from sub-Saharan Africa, how much does sub-Saharan Africa account for in terms of global trade value? We know there are vast resources coming from there, but look at the bottom line in terms of global trade value. Look at that. 0.5%, 1975, 0.95%, going down to 0.1. To 0.1. Meaning that with all these vast resources being produced, how much are they getting for it? Nothing. Nothing. This is a very significant piece of data. Then I just want to show you what has happened to sub-Saharan Africa, because what we know, and from all studies, no country ever develops without manufacturing. Okay, producing raw materials will not take you anywhere. Producing basic agricultural goods will not take you anywhere. And let's have a look at how much manufacturing activity takes place in sub-Saharan Africa. We can look over the last 15 odd years, 15, 20 years. And we see manufacturing has actually declined as a percentage of the total. This is percentages of total production in sub-Saharan Africa. How much of it is accounted for by manufacturing? So this figure here is 17% of the total.
In the interest of time, I want to stop there. I hope you're getting the gist of what he's saying. He's saying that there are geopolitical forces in place, all in concert with one another, to make sure that Africa never develops. Universities, colleges, and institutions of education are complicit because they develop the narratives. The audience that he's talking to are all graduate students. You notice how collegial they are. They're laughing and joking about the total domination of a whole continent. But to them, it's all status quo, it's normal discussion. And he says, you've known this for a long time. So they know that they are weaving together stories to tell African people to do things, believe things, conduct themselves in ways that they know are not going to help them. So I've summarized much of what he's said, and I think I put it on it's on this sheet too. So you can see that, and if you want to, he goes on to explain in great detail what he's actually talking about and how it works. Loans is a big part of it. IMF, World Bank, loans that they know you can't pay back. Loans that they know that you'll default on, and then you'll have to somehow sacrifice your infrastructure, just like the Chinese do. So this is not just the Chinese. This is the whole structure. So we're running around trying to figure out how to uplift yourself in this kind of universe that is working against you. In every effort that you make to mimic that universe of ideas, you're actually working against your own interest, because you're complicit now in your own demise. So this is, so we have some allies in places too. So I want you to see that it's not all everybody. There's people that know what we're talking about, and they don't mind saying it either. So I want to be fair to both sides.
The CIA assassinated your first popular leader, Mr. Lumumba, and then installed another dictatorship for the next 30 years. And then Glencore and others now suck out your cobalt without giving you tax income. We don't reflect on that. We say, what's wrong with you? Why don't you govern properly? It's interesting. We heard from the minister of DRC, what's wrong with your country? Well, we don't even start by saying the King of Belgium created a slave colony for 30 years. The government of Belgium ran the slave colony for another 40 years. The CIA assassinated your first popular leader, Mr. Lumumba, and then installed another dictatorship for the next 30 years. And then Glencore and others now suck out your cobalt without giving you tax income. We don't reflect on that. We say, what's wrong with you? Why don't you govern properly? And so we have a system, but we need a different system. We cannot turn this over to the private sector. We already did about 100 years ago. Not only to the private sector with the U.S. military behind it, with the defense of these property rights in the minister of Honduras's country, where United Fruit ran the country for a long time. And their attorney was the foreign minister of the United States, Secretary Dulles, and his brother was the head of the CIA, and overthrew the next door neighbor, Mr. Arbenz, to make sure that United Fruit could have its property. So we have a system, but we need a different system. And the different system has to be based on principles of human dignity in the Universal Declaration, principles of sovereignty, principles of economic rights, because these are not nice things to do. In 1948, all the government said that food is a right, social protection is a right, not a nice thing, not a pleasant thing, a right. That was 73 years ago. The SDGs are nothing more than our generation's attempt to honor the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I come from a country that not only doesn't care about the world's poor, it doesn't even care about its own poor. 1 in 7 Americans is hungry right now, and they don't care. I mean, the poor people care, but one political party, all it cares about is cutting taxes for the rich and filibustering any solution. So we're in a world that's really tough. The private sector is not going to solve this problem. I'm sorry to say to all of the private sector leaders, behave, pay your taxes, follow the rules. That's what you should do. And what the governments should do is the following. They won't, but they should. First, the G20 should become the G21 by inviting systemically the chairperson of the African Union and the African Union to be the 21st country. The European Union is a member of the G20 as the EU. If you add the AU as the 21st for the G21, you add 1.4 billion people to representation at that crucial event. That will change decisively the discussion because 1.4 billion people are not at the table for finance right now, and they need to be. So my first recommendation is the G21. I love the G20. Add one seat, 1.4 billion people with the AU represented. Second, we need an order of magnitude change of development finance. The rich countries just borrowed $17 trillion for COVID. The poor countries, nothing. Because the rich countries can borrow at 0, and the poor countries pay 5 or 10% coupon rates, or have no access at all. So the world exposed its grotesque inequality this past year and a half. Rich countries didn't say, we tighten our belts, why don't you? My country spent $7 trillion of emergency funding, not 1 penny for anybody else, by the way. $7 trillion, it didn't even cross the imagination of the US Congress to include a few crumbs for the rest of the world. But the poor countries cannot borrow. That's what we should have heard from the World Bank. I didn't hear that from the World Bank. I didn't hear real numbers. Real numbers are in trillions right now because the world economy is 100 trillion a year. But we don't talk about real numbers. But my job, all I know in this world is long division. Divide by 100 trillion and then see whether you're talking about something real or not. By the way, for COVID vaccines, what we really need is for the United States to sit down with China, with Russia, with the European Union and the UK one day around the table and allocate these vaccines rather than hoarding them. That's all it would take. The final thing is we need the UN as the core and central institution of this world, period. Because this is the only way we're going to have a civilized world is a strong UN. And it cannot be that the whole UN budget is less than my neighborhood's budget in New York. The UN core budget this year is $3 billion. New York City's budget is $100 billion. And then we say, why don't things work well? Because the rich are hoarding everything. Final point, rather than our 3 billionaires going in space, well, they could go into space and stay there and leave their money behind. That would be one idea. But another idea is we have 2,775 billionaires on the current list. Their combined net worth, 2,700, is $13.1 trillion. Now, I have it on good authority, you don't need more than $1 billion to be comfortable. But they have an excess of $11 trillion over just the 1 billion. So we should be taxing that and having a civilized world. Thank you.
Jeffrey Stocks. These was directly
Well,
south.
as with everything else, we don't have time to go into these, but we could.
Since we met you people 500 years ago, look at us. We've given everything. You are still taking. It's true. I mean, where will the whole Western world be without Africa? Our cocoa, our timber, our gold, our diamonds, our platinum, our whatever, everything you ask is us. I am not saying it, it's a fact. And in return for all of this, what have we got? Nothing. Anti-personnel indoctrination against ourselves. If you go and cook your horrible diseases like AIDS, you say it is us. You brought us tuberculosis. We didn't have this big cough until white people came here. In exchange for Africa giving Europe 500 solid years of our people, I mean not Europe, the Western world, of our human beings to work your canes, to dig your gold, to take in gold itself, diamond, I mean you know, fish, peanuts, palm oil, everything. In exchange for that, we have got nothing. Nothing. And you know it. Nothing. And you look upon, the white folks look upon us like monkeys. It is true. It's in your literature. Hey, some of your best thinkers have said this about us. Have you heard of all these Germans? Have you heard? Yes. They said Lord Burton, people like that, they said we don't even have the brain of animals. That's what we got from you people.
But don't you think that this is over now?
Over where? Is it over? Who said that AIDS came from the green monkey? Is it over?
Sisters on it.
It'll just formalize the reality that poor countries can never repay their loans.
Senator, are you saying that you're opposed to debt relief for impoverished countries?
No, we should forgive the debts, but that's not going to help those countries very much.
Okay. What will?
Tax cuts. Some African tax rates are the highest in the world. In Tanzania, the 30% rate kicks in at $475 of income. Plus, they have a 20% value-added tax. Gets added everything you buy. Those high tax rates make it impossible to build capital in those countries. So nothing gets built, not factories, not roads, not anything. Poor African countries have the lowest wage workers in the world. And yet a company like Nike, for instance, can't put a factory in one of those countries because of the oppressive tax rates. Taxes have killed any possibility of economic development. They killed any hope of these countries ever helping themselves. And that leaves them completely at the mercy of charity and loans. And here's the worst part. You know why those countries have such high tax rates? Because of us. To show us that they can raise enough money to pay back their loans. But taxes can't raise any money if they kill the economies. So it turns out the tragic, unintended consequence of our good intentions toward Africa, our kindness, is that we have encouraged those countries to lock themselves into a gruesome economic depression. If we don't urge those countries to cut their tax rates, they will never grow their economies. People will live lifetimes of unemployment. Disease will be rampant. Poverty will be permanent. And children will be hungry. And our charity will never be enough.
Okay. Well, I put this here, we had the last two slides. I put this here to let us know that the sand is running out of the hourglass. We do not really have time to sit around and talk about some silly ideas about what we're going to do or what needs to be done or how we can do better. The opposition is very well organized. I hope you can see that. Now, for those that don't follow it closely, like I do, I follow the exchange rate every day. $1 US is the equivalent of what? It may be 7.6 this morning. So now in my, that's a euro? Okay.
6.5.
6.5?
Yeah.
Well, I follow it on mobile money. But the only thing I want to mention to you is the U.S. has a $30 trillion budget deficit. $30 trillion. More money than any of us have in our car, in our bank account, in our pockets. $30 trillion. And every time they print money for a stimulus package or support, the ripple effect you will see in the devaluation of your local money. Because everybody knows that money is play money. Everybody knows that. Yesterday on mobile money, the exchange rate was, last week it was $1 for 6.03. Then it went to 6.06. Then it went to 6.13. Then it went to 6.14. 24. Today is 6.24. So this is going up all the time, which means that the local Ghanaian person has less money. The money has less buying power. And then, since everybody knows it's play money, everywhere you go, the thing you want costs more. Because everybody knows the money is not real. So you go someplace where it used to be 30 cedis is now 40 cedis. But you're not making any more money every day, every day, every day. So this is like a real hardship on the local people. So multiply that across all African nations, and it becomes very, very difficult to see how people can actually rise up with this kind of oppression, this constant pressure. That means it's more difficult to function. So we've got to understand. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, here's my closing argument. I started out suggesting that I would present evidence that we have a long, long history, at least 4,000, maybe 5,000 years of illustrious history before we ever encountered people that were not African people. So we have demonstrated for 4,000 or 5,000 years the ability to do very well on our own without any outside help. We've already demonstrated that. So we have this interruption of about 500 years of encountering people that were non-African people. And ever since then, somehow, we have developed some significant amnesia. We can't remember what we used to be like. We have fallen in love with these ideas and these people. We're suffering from what they usually call oppressive syndrome, where you're oppressed for so long by someone that you actually begin to normalize your situation. As crazy as it is, it's like a battered wife syndrome. Getting beat up every day But you say, well, tomorrow's going to be better. He said he's going to change. He's going to do all right. So I'm going to trust in that. But it's the same thing over and over and over and over and over. So my suggestion, my proposal, which is not really that complicated if you think about it, requires that we consider two things. One, we are not dealing with individual people running around that don't like us. We're dealing with institutional attitudes, practices, and policies against us. So an individual can't run out and challenge an institution. So what do we have to do? We have to think about organizing into institutional thinking ourselves, because we are battling other institutions. Now, it sounds really complicated, but it probably isn't as difficult as it seems, because all of the apparatus that is working against us requires our participation. They can't do it without us going along with it. So we have to be complicit in our own oppression. But that's not that difficult to begin to chip away. So we say that Sankofa is the concept that we need to put firmly in our minds. The bird with the head pointed backwards. We need to look back to what we were before we ever met these people and figure out, what did we know that we don't seem to remember now? What did we do that we don't do now? What did we learn and amass in terms of wisdom that we don't exercise now? Because we are not behaving as wise people. And there's a proverb, one of my favorites, that says, going back to tradition is your first step forward. So we could learn about what are the traditional things that African people used to do and adopt some of those. Every day, adopt one. Begin to do something that is tradition. We say learning the traditions where we are. We're in a very rich traditional environment. Those traditions would help us to understand how we could do things better, how we could organize ourselves better. And coming to Ghana and mimicking Los Angeles, California is not going to be the solution to our problem. Recreating New York City is not going to be the solution to our problem. So we have to do something that we've done before. So anything that we've done before, I believe we can do again. It may not be that simple, but dealing with a constant environment of oppression every day is not that simple either. So we can do something different. So in closing, what I would like to suggest is that if anyone wants any of this information, let me know. I can get your email. The email should be on the sign-in sheet already. So if you want it, let me know. We'll mark the sign-in sheet. I'll take it and I'll send to you via email. Now the emails are probably going to be insufficient in strength to send all of this at once. So it may have to come in a different format. But I'll figure that out so that you can have it. Or if we get a flash drive or pen drive, I'll load it onto that thing. Because my hope was today, if this makes any sense to anybody, and you had it, you would probably share it with someone else that may not have any idea that these things are even going on. The first thing is to begin to understand collectively where we are and what we may need to do. And everything doesn't have to be done by a group. One individual could make a decision to do something that's different. All the diasporas that are sitting here, you've already made that decision to leave someplace to come here, myself included. So we've already made a decision. Now we can all make our individual decision and say, I'm going to just do this. And what is that? I wrote a letter to the Speaker of Parliament to compliment him on wearing traditional cloth in the Parliament. I wrote a personal letter to him thanking him, because if you start, for example, if every Ghanaian wore Ghanaian clothes, we wouldn't have the market flooded with blue jeans and all these things. They did that intentionally to make these items less costly than the things that you would normally wear. And since you have Western dress as the official dress in business, everybody's trying to mimic that. But we could one by one say, I'm not going to wear that. I'm going to wear this. If I go to buy cloth, I could say, even though it's a little bit more expensive, and maybe it's a lot more expensive, I'm not going to buy the cloth that the Germans have put in the stores, or the Chinese have flooded the stores with our kente and prints and all this stuff, and they're cheaper. So we don't buy the local thing because it's more expensive. So the local people can't make progress because they can't conduct their business, because we're not willing to spend a little extra to help our own people. And we know that all these things we're wearing, many of them, most of them, if not all of them, have come from Germany. I visited Germany once, about 15 years ago, and I went to the factory where they're making all the cloth that are sold in Ghana, across the country. All the cloth is in there, all made by Germans and shipped. So the things that even the things we buy to make ourselves feel a little bit more at home, we're sending money to people that are not at home. The money is going someplace else and destroying the capacity of the local people to make money doing the same thing, because their prices naturally have to be higher. So we can start thinking. The first thing is to start thinking as an African person. Forget about all these things that the West is telling us would be good if you did that. If you just put that out of your mind and assume, make yourself a 10th man or a 10th woman. Just assume that that's not a good idea, and figure out something else to do that is a better idea. It has more long-term benefit, and it can help other people legitimately. So to just run around in a maze like gerbils in a little cage doing something, we still end up in that cage. At the end of all that running, you still end up the same place. So I would just like to thank Nana Duakwa, Nana Obakesi, Nana Chittiwa, all of you. I hope this has provided something that might be of value and may get us thinking along a different way of thinking about these things, so that we might tell people something a little bit different when they come to Elmina Dungeon and you're the tour guide. You can tell them something different now, perhaps, that you didn't tell them before, to make it understandable. So I am thrilled. I'm happy you were here. I hope it's been helpful. I'll do anything that I can, as long as I'm breathing, to help move us in this direction, whether it's in the village, whether it's here, whether it's in our stable, or wherever it is. So I want to applaud, I forgot, Abigail. Abigail, as I mentioned earlier, Abigail is a resident of Atonkwa. She's a student of the Atonkwa school. She has been nurtured by her good friend, Nana Chittiwa, through school into her post-school experience, and she is now catering. And what's the program? What's the name of your program? Is it catering?
Yes.
Oh, it's catering. So that is the official name. So this is her first gig today, ever. So we want to give her a round of applause. So this is her first catering job. And it's also her birthday today. So She's 19. So I'm gonna leave some money if anybody else wants to contribute. I'm gonna leave it on the table so we can wish her a happy birthday and much success going forward. Thank you so much. Any question for me? I'll be happy to try to entertain it. If not, I'll ask to be dismissed.
I'd like to say, is there anyone who does not want a copy of this presentation? You don't want? Okay, I'm gonna put everybody wants.
Okay. Let me ask a housekeeping question. Has everybody paid their 30 Ghana for the program? Okay, so if you haven't, the sister's collecting it.
Anybody else?
And we'll use it for good purposes, of course. I'd like to thank Amos. Amos, what's your real name? Nana what? What?
Nana Kopena 18.
Now check this out from our conversation. This is Nana Kopena 18.
Yeah.
And he's running around here as Amos. He's running around here as Amos. He disguised himself as Amos. For what reason? So we gotta undo these things. Well, am I free to go?
No.
No? I'm free to adjourn. Excellent. I'll get on the email, the package, sending this right away. Right away. So whatever you can do with it, go for it. Oh, I'm gonna start working on it right away.
This is the first one. Happy birthday. Welcome to something. Exactly.
Before I go, might I make one last announcement for people that came in later. Next Wednesday at 2, Alan Chittiwah has agreed, as you can see here, to give a Black History Month lecture discussion. She said it's going to be an interactive program on Khan's protocol, so they can become more aware of traditional customs and practices in the place where we now find ourselves. So that's my final little announcement. Abigail, I'm going to get my Nana Amos. That doesn't even sound right. Nana Amos. Said that if you want, you can get the program on the YouTube channel for Oppressive University is on the YouTube channel. It was streaming live too. So he said it was streaming live. Oppressive University. That's the YouTube channel.
Oppressive University.
Okay.
Everything is
Oh, you want to organize?
YouTube. I'm ending the program now.
Okay.
Yeah. So the ending.
William is,